if you're having that issue, that's why. Dynamic range optimizer, you want to turn this off. So I went and picked up a second A7 Mark IV and I've got it all set up, and finally I've done all my fine tuning, and in today's video I'm going to go through all the settings I've custom programmed into my A7 IVs, everything I use to go and shoot hybrid photo and video at weddings. The new functionality in the A7 IVs mean it's just much faster and much easier to shoot photo and video at a wedding. And I actually had a wedding yesterday where I had to do photo and video by myself because it was just the way it worked out, and it went really well, and I'm really stoked with it. So let's just jump straight into it. So I'm going to put timestamps in the description. You guys can jump forward because this is going to be a longer video, but if you want to skip to certain sections, then you can jump back and forth because I do tend to speak a little bit quick. I'll touch on any random points along the way if we need to, but I've got my Atomos Ninja here recording the menu, so you'll be able to see exactly what I'm doing, and I have my camera up the top here so you can see all the custom function buttons that I'm talking about. So the only thing I haven't set up yet is the My menu. I'm not sure what I want to put in there yet, but I'm going to just do that over the wedding season and customize it as I go. So maybe I'll update that, but it's going to be different for everybody, so I don't think it's really relevant. So jumping into the main menus, into image quality, obviously I'm not shooting JPEG, so that's irrelevant. I'm just going straight to RAW, and I am shooting compressed RAW. I was doing the lossless compressed RAW, but I've done some tests and I can't really see the difference. And with a 128 gig card, I get about 500 extra shots with compressed RAW. Up to you, lossless or compressed or uncompressed. It really depends, but yeah, there's very little difference in image quality, and I'm shooting in compressed RAW. I'm shooting compressed RAW to both slots as well, so if you go down to record media settings, obviously I have it set up to simultaneous recording and photo, and at the moment I just have it recording to one memory card with video, but you can record photo and video in full quality to both memory cards if you wish. I definitely recommend using UHS 2 memory cards with that option because you just need the extra speed for the buffer. Aspect ratio, that's just where you can go in and change the settings. You can set it to like 16:9, and it'll shoot the RAW in 16:9, but if you go into Lightroom and click revert to original or whatever it is, original settings, it will go back to 3:2. File format, I'm usually shooting XAVC 4K, and I just have it set to 25p with the lowest megabit rate for 10-bit, because I really want that 10-bit color. It makes a big difference in my opinion. You can shoot 50p. It does crop it in like a 1.5 times crop, I think. Originally, I thought that was going to be a little bit of a hassle, but after shooting, especially the wedding yesterday, I shot photo and video by myself, and I found shooting in crop mode with video was actually quite handy. So I shot the entire day in 4K 50p, and it's just nice having that extra reach. So it wasn't really an issue for me at all. And yeah, I was pretty happy with it. APS-C shooting, I don't use that really these days at all. You can program that to a custom function button. If you had seen my A7R series videos, I had APS-C mode programmed to like C2, I think. You punch it in and then you've got a 1.5 times crop. But because that camera is 61, 62 megapixels, you'd still get quite a high resolution photo. sRGB I'm using for my color space. I've done a bunch of tests again with Adobe RGB versus sRGB, and I can't see any difference, so I just stick with what's ever simple. Lens compensation, I have all those on auto, and that just corrects any distortion, or I like having it there. File folder settings, this is just where you can go ahead and change the file name, which is quite handy. So I'm going to change these ones to like CT1 and CT2 because I have two A7 IVs now. And this one, right serial number, is pretty important to turn on because I think it's off by default. I don't know why it would do that, but if you have the serial number written to the files, it means that you can separate all your images by serial number in Lightroom, which can be quite handy if you're trying to sync up images as well and you have all the same camera. Camera set memory, that is the custom buttons, the dials on the top here, but we'll go through that when we get to the setting up the hybrid and video settings. USB streaming, I haven't actually done with this camera, but it's set up really well for USB streaming, so maybe I'll do another video on that. Drive mode, I always just have it in continuous high. It's lower than my A9 II that I was using, but it's plenty. I think it's like 5 or 6 frames a second, and that's heaps for me. I've never felt like I needed more. I'm not doing like sports or wildlife or anything, so that's great for weddings. Silent mode, I don't really use silent mode. I did at a wedding on Saturday just because it was quite a small ceremony and it was outside. There was no issues with like flickering lights or fast movement or anything, so I did use silent shooting. But my advice was silent shutter, and that's with any camera other than like the A9 or the A1 series, is just to be really careful. If you have bad lighting, you can get just flickering that will just completely ruin your raw files. And also watch out for like warping and stuff like that. I just leave all this stuff as standard. I haven't changed anything. It all works pretty well as it is. Electronic front curtain, I leave that on. I know a lot of people turn it off because good old Manny made a video about how it changes the bokeh in the background, and honestly, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, but it's such a minor difference that for me it's not worth the extra sound. It just really sounds a lot louder having it off, so I leave it on, and I'm just really not worried about losing that 0.5% of bokeh in the background. But that's just, again, my opinion. You guys do whatever you want. There's no harm in having electronic front curtain off. Release without lens, I have that enabled because sometimes I like to do free lensing. I've done a video on that as well. It's quite an old one. Maybe I should update that. Release without card, I have that disabled. That's pretty obvious why. Anti-flicker, that one does work quite well. I have that on all the time. I see no reason to turn it off. Sometimes it does make a little bit of a delay, but it does work very, very well. I shot a wedding in a barn recently, and the entire thing was lit with just fairy lights, and the flicker was just shocking. So, and I didn't have any flicker in the photos at all, even with electronic front curtain, so it works really, really well. Steady shot, always just leave that on. I don't use these zoom features. This is just for like JPEG and video mode, but like a digital zoom, but I don't use that. I usually have grid line display off, just because I don't like anything on the screen when I'm looking, but you can put it on and set it to rule of thirds or however you like. I do have that set up in the function menu as well, so you can get to that quickly. Live view display set, this is just the actual live exposure settings when you're looking through the viewfinder on the back display. If you turn that off, you're just going to be using a mirrorless camera as if it was like a DSLR, and you're not going to get the benefits of using a mirrorless camera. There's probably some use cases where it would be handy, but I've never ever turned it off. Right, jumping into exposure settings. For my custom function 1, this is where we're getting a little bit different. So with custom function 1, I have it set to aperture priority and auto ISO. And then 2 I have set to full manual, and the dials are a little bit different as well. So we'll jump into that now. With auto ISO, I make sure I have my limit set to 12,800. You can go higher. This camera handles low light really well. And the important thing is to set your minimum shutter speed. If you don't do that, you can be in some serious trouble. So make sure I don't go below 2/50th. If it's a really dark, like a really dark reception, I'm not using any lights and nobody's kind of running around, then I'll use 1/25th if I just want to drop my ISO a little bit. Now what that's going to do is just keep your shutter speed at a minimum of 2/50th of a second until you get to 12,800 ISO or whatever your max limit is, and then your shutter speed is going to start dropping. If you don't set that, or if you set it to auto, you can get a lot of photos taken at like 60th of a second because your camera is prioritizing a low ISO, and you really don't want that because you're going to get a lot of motion blur. I don't adjust any of this stuff at all. The only thing you could do is change it to half stops increments when you're using exposure compensation, but I just like to leave it on 0.3, and that's just how I work. Metering I have on multi. I never really change this at all. Metering is, I feel like multi is the way to go with mirrorless cameras because you're adjusting it live, so you don't really need to compensate for anything. It just works really well. AEL with shutter, I have that turned off because I just don't want it, but if you have that turned on, what it means is if you're focusing and recomposing, say you focus on one spot and you half press the shutter and then recompose, it's going to keep that exposure setting, where I don't really want that. If I'm going to focus and recompose, I want to, the exposure to adjust when I move the camera. Flash mode, this is all just standard fill flash, not changing anything here. White balance auto usually. If I'm doing photo and video at the same time, quite often I'll set it to the Kelvin, like 5000K or 5500K, depends on the situation obviously, but the point is I'll set it manually if I'm doing photo and video because I don't want it changing like mid-shot if I'm taking a video clip. But for the most part I find auto works really well, and you can set it to ambient or white, but I find leaving it on standard these days is the way to go with these new cameras. It works really well for me. Dynamic range optimizer, you want to turn this off. I think it's on by default, and it's going to get you into a bit of trouble when you import your photos. If you're shooting raw and you input your photos into Lightroom, you're going to find most of your photos are going to go dark by about a stop at least. And turn dynamic range optimizer off. The reason it's doing that is because when it's exposing, the dynamic range optimizer is bringing the shadows up a little bit, but it's only for the JPEG preview. So what you're seeing in your camera is not what's going to come out in the raw files. So you want to turn that off. Creative looks, I don't use at all. Sometimes I'll put it in black and white if I'm feeling a little bit sassy, but you know, it doesn't stick to raw files anyway. So picture profiles, we'll get into that definitely when we jump into the video section. Zebra display, I don't use zebras, I just find it annoying. I know a lot of people do. Sometimes with video I'll use it, but definitely not if I'm doing hybrid or photo. Focus modes, a lot of the stuff is straight out of the box, other than the fact I'm using back button focus, which we'll get into in a minute. But I'm on continuous AF always. I never use any of the other options other than manual. Continuous AF is the way to go with these cameras, hands down. I have AFS set to AF, which means it's not going to take the shot until it's in focus. But like I said, I'm not really using AFS anyway. And AFC I have set to balance emphasis. Sometimes I change it to release, which means that if whenever you press the shutter, it's going to take the photo regardless of whether the camera thinks it's in focus or not. I do find sometimes with the older cameras in general, if I didn't have it set to release, if I had it set to balance or focus, there would be a little bit of a delay. With this camera, it's just always in focus, and I've not had any issues with either way. So balanced emphasis seems to be fine. Tracking sensitivity, I have that set to standard. All that's doing is, say if you're focused on somebody, and somebody walks in front of your camera, it's just adjusting the amount of time it's going to hold that focus. So if you have it set to locked on, it's going to keep that subject that you focused on for a lot longer and let that person walk by. If you have it set to responsive, as soon as that person walks in front of your camera, it's probably going to change to them. So I just have it set to standard, and that works pretty well. AF illuminator, I turn that off. I'm not sure why it's still on auto, but yeah, I don't use it, and it doesn't work when I use my flashes because I'm using Godox flashes anyway. And yeah, that's standard. AF with shutter, this is where you turn it off if you want to use back button focus. There's a lot of reasons, in my opinion, to use back button focus. If it's not something you want to do, go ahead and just do it however you would like. I'll put a link in the description to why I use back button focus and how I have it set up, but we will go over the custom buttons as well with this camera very soon. Pre-AF, I have that off because it's just annoying. Focus area, I usually have that set to tracking small, so it just gives me that little dot. So when you press the AF on button, it's going to lock on, and yeah, hold that spot and track it for you. There's one here, so this one, area display during tracking. I put that on, it's off by default. If you turn it off, when you focus, the dot disappears, the dot that's in the middle of the frame, and then it comes back when you let go, if you know what I mean. If you turn it on, it just keeps that white dot in the center or wherever it is. So if I put it over here, it's just going to keep it. I don't know why I do that, but I just like it like that, and that's just personal preference. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky because I have face eye detection turned off, but I don't really have it turned off. I just have it programmed to a separate button, and I'll show you that when we go through the custom functions, which is coming up really soon. Face eye, this is where you can change it to different subjects. And then the other thing is to turn on face eye frame display. So that just shows up the gray boxes of all the faces it's picking up on the frame, so you can go ahead and select them when you have eye detection on. Peaking, I do use that sometimes, but I just have it set to low and white. It just kind of sharpens it up a little bit so I can see if I'm using a manual focus lens or something like that. These settings, I don't change anything other than the ratings. So I have ratings set to a custom key, and I just have 1 star selected, so I've deselected all these other ones. This stuff is all pretty standard. I don't use any of this. The only thing I change in here, I mean, this is where you can go ahead and register your smartphone for the app, which I do use. So when I'm at a wedding and I'll sit down for dinner time, I'll transfer like 8 or 10 images to my phone, edit them really quickly, and then print them out on my little Fuji Instax printer. I give that to the couple and they just love it. They get something cool that they can take home with them. It's like a little sneak peek on the day, and it's just something to get them really excited about it, which I quite like. The only thing I do is right down the bottom is I'll turn airplane mode on usually, and that just saves a little bit of battery when I'm not using it. NTSC and power, if you don't know, this is where you can change it from, 100p versus 120p, or 24p versus 25p. So this is where the good stuff is. Custom key dial settings. These, I'll just talk about these quickly, but you can see them on the screen, and if you want to go ahead and copy my settings, this is how I do it. But we'll run through it really quickly now so you can see what I'm doing. So IAF I have set to this AEL button here. So what that's going to do is, even though I have eye detection turned off, it works when it like activates itself and works when I press the AEL button, and I have the AF on button set to AF on. So I have them separated, and I find when I have eye detection turned off and I'm using the tracking, which I am most of the time, sometimes if I had eye detection turned on, it would just get distracted and kind of pick something, like it would switch to a face where I didn't want it to switch to a face. Maybe if I was shooting in between two people to get someone in the background. So that's why I have it separated to those different buttons. I have the C1 button here programmed to focus magnifier. So that's really handy for doing manual focus, or if I'm doing video, I can just tap that twice and it punches into 100% so I can manually focus. Focus mode, because these cameras don't have the dial like my A9 did, I have that set to C3, so that's where I can change it to manual focus or AFC. I have the rubbish bin set to touch operation, so I usually have touchscreen off unless I'm doing video, so I can just turn touchscreen on and off with that button there. Jumping down into rear 2, focus standard is just when you push in on the joystick and it's just going to recenter that focus point to the middle of the frame. Focus area I have set to the middle one, this button here, and that just allows me to tap it and then go through and change where I am, which mode I want to use. Drive mode, that's just standard. I haven't changed that at all. I like to leave that how it is. And ISO is the same. This one I have set to face eye, so I don't have to go into the menu and turn it on or off if I want to. So I can just tap the bottom one and that turns eye detection on or off. So the top, I just have that set to movie shooting as always, and then white balance on C2. Lens, I have that set to focus hold because I do find that quite handy, and most of my lenses have focus hold on them. So if I'm doing video and I'll just have it in continuous, I can lock onto something, hold that button, and then nothing walking in front of it is going to get them out of focus. So this is where the hybrid shooting comes into it. You want to separate the photo and video settings when you switch, at least I want to anyway. So when I'm shooting in manual versus aperture priority, in manual I have this button here set to ISO, so I don't have to press any button, I can just adjust it on the fly, which means I have all my exposure settings set to each 3 dials, and that's really handy for me. I really like that. And then when I'm in aperture priority, it's set to exposure compensation, so I'm covered for all bases, and just activating that allows you to make that change. Custom keys for video, I have them changed, it's all the same for the photo mode, so I don't change anything in there. And the only other one is custom key I have set to rating on C3. So if I want to do a sneak peek and I remember to, I can go through and tag photos on the day. So it's quite easy to select photos and transfer them to my phone or something like that. You can just select them from the rating. Function menu settings, you can just run through these, pause this if you want to go through and check it. They are different for photo and video. So yeah, these are the things I use, and feel free to pause it and copy me, but this works really well for me, and I haven't wanted to change anything yet. So some of them are kind of irrelevant, I never use, but I just kind of had to fill the spot, but that's how I have function menu set up. The other thing you're going to want to change is different settings for photos and videos. This one's really important for how I do it anyway, shooting video. So this one I have, the only one that it remembers is picture profile. But what this is you can save certain settings that's going to carry over to photo and video mode. You can kind of separate those. So the reason I have picture profiles corrected is because, say I'm in mode 1 here and I'm in photo, if I switch over to video mode, it's going to go to SLOG3, and it's going, because I have it saved to +2 exposure settings, because that's just how you have to expose SLOG3. Custom key dials, we've already set that up in the previous menu. My dial settings, I don't use these yet. I just find it adds a little bit more complexity than I need, but it's a cool feature. It means that you can kind of like hold C2 and then move one of the dials and it will change something other than what you would have had it to. But obviously it means you're losing that custom function for something else. So I like it the way I have it set up, but you guys feel free to go and have a play with that as well. Yeah, you can change the display quality to high, which I will do. I'm not sure why that's not like that. And find a frame rate. I have that set to standard because if you have it on high, the sharpness drops a little bit, and I prefer it to be a lower frame rate but a sharper image when I'm looking through it. Gamma display, I do use that when I'm shooting in SLOG3, which I am a lot, and we're going to get into that real soon. That just means if you're shooting SLOG3, if you turn it on, it's going to make it look like Rec 709, so you can expose it easier and set your white balance easier as well. Auto review, I have that turned off because no chimping. Power save, I have that set to 5 minutes because I don't want the camera being turned off all the time. It's just annoying. Auto power off temp set to high because on standard, I mean, I've never had any warnings anyway, but you know, none of these cameras have overheated for me at all. But having it on high just means you're not going to get that. You know, it's going to allow the camera to get a little bit warm before throwing you a warning. So, getting into the hybrid shooting settings. So, with the A7 IV, you have the ability to change from photo to video mode really, really fast and easy. And the good thing is, these 1, 2, and 3 dials on the top also apply to photo and video. So technically you have 6 custom function settings. So 3 for photo and 3 for video. So like I said, you can separate them from the custom function. So if I'm in photo mode, I switch it over to video, it's going to jump into that video mode, and I have it set to the 50p crop option, but you can set it to 25p if you don't want to have that crop, and it's still in aperture priority mode. The only difference is it's changing it to SLOG3. So I have it set to SLOG3, S-Gamut3, Sony, and the only other thing I do is change detail level to 0 because it's on -7. And it's just, again, a personal preference like everything else in this video, but I have it set to 0 just for that kind of factory sharpness, if you want to call it that. That's how I shoot video now, and SLOG3 is magic with this camera. I just use the conversion LUTs, and then I use my own LUTs, which there's a link in the description if you want to check those out, to put my color on there, but it looks really great. I'll throw some samples up. It looks fantastic straight out of the box. All these samples you're seeing, just SLOG3 with the conversion LUT and my LUT on top of that, with no adjustments whatsoever. It just works really, really well. So yeah, 1 is set to photo aperture priority, and if I switch it to video, it goes straight into video mode, and then same with 2 is in manual, and then when you switch to video, it's manual video as well. And like you can see here, if I change the dial, it's going to change the ISO, so that carries over. Whereas if I'm on aperture priority, it's just going to change the exposure compensation. So that's really handy to have there. And that's pretty much it. That's how I shoot photo and video hybrid settings with the A7 IV. If you have any questions about the settings, or if I've missed anything out, drop a comment below and I'll answer those as soon as possible. But yeah, I hope you guys really enjoy shooting with the A7 IVs. I'm really glad to have my second one, because now I have pretty much the dream kit that I need for my weddings, especially for doing hybrid photo and video. So right now I have 2 A7 Mark IVs, which are my main cameras. I have my A7S III, which I'm shooting on. I use all my videos for YouTube with that, and I do my ceremony and speeches. And then I also have my A6600, which I use as like a B tripod camera for ceremonies and speeches as well. So these days when I'm doing hybrid video and photo, I always have 2 cameras set up on a tripod, and then I just have the cameras on my body doing photo and video. And it makes it really, really easy to make a really excellent product for your couples. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Go ahead and set your cameras up. Let me know how you have yours set up in the comment section. I'm sure a lot of people are going to have it set up their own personal way, which is great. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of this content. I'll see you guys in the next video soon.